Who needs 9 lives when you've got 9 tails? Today, we look at one of the faces of the franchise, Ahri, the nine-tailed fox. Welcome to Runeterra Tourist. My name is Patrick. I don't know anything about these people yet, so let's learn about them together. With the Legends of Unleashed finished, where else will we turn but the origins of Riftbound? It's all downhill from here, folks. Strap in. And who else should we start with but one of the most popular champions in all of Runeterra? I mean, she is consistently among the most played mid lane champions, the face of the music group KDA, and one of the most skinned champions in the game. She is a franchise icon. Ahri was faring okay in set 1, getting a little outshined by Kaisa, Master Yi, and eventually Annie, but it didn't stop me from seeing her at Nexus Nights. The diehard fans could not resist, which, now that I know a little bit more about her, seems fitting. After all, Ahri was based on the Korean mythological character Gumyo, I'm probably saying that all wrong, the nine-tailed fox who can transform into a beautiful woman to seduce men and kill them. In League of Legends, Ahri is a mobile mage. She has this ability to throw an orb that flies out and returns to her. She can summon 3 foxfires that seek out nearby enemies. She also blows a kiss that charms an enemy, making them walk helplessly toward her. And her ultimate lets her dash up to 3 times in quick succession, firing these essence bolts as she moves. And her passive heals her when she takes down enemies, so basically charming them and stealing their essence. Her Legend of Runeterra abilities are much more different than what she does in League of Legends. Introduced in December of 2021, almost 10 years after her League of Legends appearance, she's built around the recall archetype, where she will recall these allies back to hand for value. Quick attack and elusive, and recalled allies cost 1 less to replay, and each time she attack strikes, she swaps out with the ally to her right. And so it allows her to gain value of resummoning these units back to the battlefield. She also has the Ahri's Charm spell, which recalls an ally unit to make an enemy vulnerable. And in Legends of Runeterra, that means that you can dictate who that enemy defends on your battlefield. So what would she be like in Riftbound? I guess we'll explore that in just a second, but we've got a lot to get through with her lore. Before we even do any of that, some real quick housekeeping here. Like and subscribe, and if you're on mobile, you can do this hype thing, which apparently that's a thing now that gets channels more recognition. So all that helps the channel to grow. Greatly appreciate it. Anyway, what is the tale behind the nine-tailed fox? I told you it's only going to get worse. Well, funny enough, just like the number of tails she has, Ahri doesn't have just one tail, she has several. And her backstory has gone through many iterations at this point, starting with her initial release in 2011, then getting an update in 2017, and then the updated Spirit Blossom that she received in 2020, followed by one more that accompanied her champion update in 2023. The original lore is pretty easy to just get through quickly. Basically, she was this unique fox in Ionia who always felt this connection to the magical world around her, and she felt that the skin that she was born into was ill-fitting, dreaming that she would one day become human. She consumed the essence of this dying mage on the battlefield and began transforming into a human woman, and so the transformation was not complete. And so as a result, she joined the Institute of War, which is now retconned into the League of Legends, and seeking to complete her transition. This was all in the era of she has a past, but she doesn't know it, writing the whole minimal depth character existing primarily as a design, the story being an afterthought. Then in 2017, and one more revision 3 years later, they updated the backstory to say that while she didn't know who her parents were, she carried one connection to them, this unknown part of her past life, these twin sunstones. They were only gemstones back in 2017, but morphed into sunstones in 2020, and there was a more direct recognition that she was Vastayan in that later update as well, making that her only tie to the tribe. Ahri's earliest memories are of running with ice foxes in the northern reaches of Shanjian, Ionia, and she knew she was not one of them, but they accepted her as a kindred spirit, and so she had to teach herself about the connection she had with the magic of her kind. Living in the wild, her abilities started to surface, this channeling of the spirit realm, enhanced reflexes, and the ability to control the emotions of her prey. And now, instead of a dying mage on a battlefield, it was an encounter with foreign soldiers, and she was drawn specifically to this hunter among them. And then in the 2020 version, it was solely a band of hunters. When the hunter was wounded by an arrow, Ahri felt his life seeping away and instinctively devoured his essence that was leaving his body, but this caused her to gain a brief insight of his memories. She saw the lover that he had lost in battle, his children from this strange foreign land of iron and stone, and she found herself being able to push his emotions from fear to sorrow to joy, and comforted him in his last moments with this vision of a sun-soaked meadow before he died. She became obsessed with manipulating her prey and capturing more of their memories, so she traveled to Ionia to experience more of these overwhelming emotions. And eventually she discovered the tale of an unearthly fox demon, and she was worried that she may be affiliated with that. As she absorbed more of life essences, she began to feel guilty ending the lives of so many of her victims and began to identify more and more with them. And so in the 2017 version, she isolates herself into this coastal village and eventually infiltrating the entire population's dreams. But then later versions just kept it simple to the fringes of society. Either way, in both versions, she grew remorseful for the grief she brought onto her victims, and so she eventually learned how to get by on only taking just a few memories to consume nothing more than what she really needed, which is perhaps where my memory of my car keys is gone. But she still felt the pain of her victims, and she just observed that while her powers would weaken when she wouldn't feed, she would just take just a little bit that she needed, and determined that after a while, to really embrace her true nature, she would embody this monster. There are numerous other stories involving Ahri, including the one about this artist that she encountered, and rather than stealing his essence, he actually voluntarily gave it up to her in exchange for her love. And so they would sit by the lake in the edge of Ionia while he painted flowers, and Ahri felt this genuine happiness without having to feed on the spiritual essence, and the two eventually fell in love. But as in her nature, she lost control of her ravenous instincts and one day completely consumed her lover and eventually killed him. Devastated, she traveled to the Garden of Forgetting, a place tended by this ancient figure known by many names: the Eater of Secrets, the Forgotten, the Witch Gardener, whom Ahri called Ilkilia. I'm sure I'm saying that right as well. The Ionian word for great-grandmother, and she wanted to do one thing, which was forget him, begging the woman to help her. Despite warning Ahri of how this might affect her, she reluctantly agreed, and so the woman handed Ahri this snow lily and told her to breathe the memory onto it, and what followed wasn't relief, but she relived his death, vision after vision, until Ahri understood that removing the memory was actually far worse than just carrying it with her. After checking if Ahri was okay and still retained her memories, the gardener quietly and quickly urged Ahri to leave the garden before it takes her, because dark vines and these snow lilies began to close off all of the exits, and Ahri just barely managed to get out of there. Her story then progresses to becoming consumed with learning everything about her origins of her mysterious Vastayan tribe, and so she wished to find a solution to control her abilities. And so this brought her to several destinations and several tales, though not 9 of them. Notably, the 2020 revision observed that through stolen visions, she began to glimpse knowledge of the Vastaya, these beings like herself, and that these sunstones gave her glimpses that set her on her search to find out who was her tribe, who were these people, and where did she come from. Her travels through Ionia eventually led her to Omikayalan, the once sacred grove of the God Willow, a legendary and magical tree that had been cut down thousands of years ago. Who could have done that, I wonder? There she met several spiritual creatures that had protected this young sapling of the god Willow, including Vastayan lords. And it was there that she learned to embrace her wild Vastayan nature, continuing her search for her lost tribe and leaving the sacred grove. And this actually makes an interesting turn back to her other short story, and I believe her original first short story. So it's interesting that Legends of Runeterra brought it right back to this story. In it, she's searching for her lost tribe and travels to an Ionian market, taking in the new environment incognito, of course, as one can, looking like a Vastaya, and a fortune teller named Hirin, I'm sure I'm pronouncing that right, approached Ahri and recognized her twin sunstones as the work of this talented artisan named Yamello. Do they call him Mello Yamello? Boomer should get that reference. But that someone recognizes the only link to her past, Ahri is curious, like a fox would be, I suppose, and asks the fortune teller for more details. Hirin invites Ahri into her caravan for some tea, not sketchy at all, while she proceeds to tell Ahri all she knew about Yamello, explaining how he was this master sculptor known for cultivating fossilized lizard eggs and carving them into these intricate shapes, very similar to the sunstones and how they were carved together. As the conversation went on, Hirin pulls out a hunting knife inconspicuously and revealed that she slipped a paralysis poison into Ahri's tea, leaving Ahri unable to move or pounce. Hirin sought to cut off one of Ahri's tails, seeing that they are a useful and extremely valuable ingredient for her potions. Despite being paralyzed, Ahri managed to use her dream-devouring abilities to steal the essence of Hirin and make herself strong enough to move again. But understandably enraged, she begins to devour this woman's entire essence. However, in doing so, she sees all of the hardships this woman has gone through and decides to spare her, only removing the parts where they had their encounter, and then took off to find out more about Yamello. This then leads us to the Ruin King, the final story, so prepare yourselves for this one. This is pretty lengthy, but this is where Ahri finds herself in a tea house in Ionia. You see, at some point, Ahri discovers more clues about Yamello off screen, I guess, that required her to travel to Bilgewater, and so she seeks a bodyguard escort. And so this is when she runs into Yasuo, this lone swordsman seeking a purpose of his own outside of Ionia, and she convinces him, probably not really hard to do given her abilities, to accompany her to Bilgewater. And good lord, did this inspire a lot of fan fiction. Might I not suggest going down that rabbit hole unless you really want to. They arrive in the pirate city, and somehow along the way, in a manner typical of Riot that is never explained, she knows that the tribe she's seeking is the Vasani. Then learning that the Vasani Sunstone was recently purchased by a member of the Jagged Hooks named Malik, and he is heading towards Grey Harbor. By now, Yasuo is getting a little annoyed with Ahri for not explaining her plans to him, and finally deduces her true nature as a Vastaya as she reveals her mission. That night, Ahri suffers the nightmare of her former artist lover and fears that the same thing is going to happen to Yasuo. Interesting connection there. So suddenly she realizes she doesn't need a bodyguard anymore and heads to Grey Harbor herself, discovering that the Pirate King Gangplank actually took the Sunstone and conveniently set off for the Shadow Isles, the location where everything in this game takes place. She takes off for the Shadow Isles and encounters a nature spirit, Maokai, who reveals that Gangplank had allied with Thresh, this wretched wraith, using his artifacts to stir the mist and cause it to create this impenetrable fortress walls, weakening Maokai by infecting his roots, with the Vasani vaults somehow at the center of the situation, conveniently. Oh, and eventually Yasuo makes it to the Shadow Isles with his crew involving Braum, Ilawe, Miss Sarah Fortune, and Pike, who is suddenly somehow okay with a captain in his presence, interestingly enough. They realize that Thresh would be in his fortress, protected by the Black Mist, so they decide to head off to cleanse Maokai's roots by fighting off this mist, although the nature spirit would be a little slow to regain his strength, and during this fight, Ahri decides to do her own thing, and so she sneaks off to the Vasani vaults to learn more about her ancestors, discovering that they had this deep connection to the Shadow Isles themselves and created technology based around preserving memories. The crew makes a plan to help Maokai regenerate his strength faster through this undersea temple of the Buru, this fighting off these sea serpents that were protecting it and what have you, and meeting this undead shade Necrit, who talks about the origins of the Shadow Isles, the fact that it's Viego's doing after his heart was broken from the tragic death of his wife Isolde, and Thresh wants to use the artifacts to awaken Viego from the mist. But enough of that boring sob story. We've got Ahri here. I mean, I'm kind of not kidding here. The crew goes and takes on Thresh, but Ahri searches for her own closure instead of gangplank with the rest of the people. Oh, and there were some depleted sunstones found in Thresh's Library of Agony, which is filled with all of his self-published novels or something? I don't know. But anyway, it was enough to keep Ahri on board, literally and figuratively, with the main mission. So we got her back. After the crew defeats Gangplank, Ahri senses something in the mist involving Viego's discarded memories, seeing the negative parts of the marriage and learning the truth that his love for his wife was not as pure as he tells himself. They figure weaponizing these memories will weaken Viego and create an opening to defeat him. Although then there's something about this amulet that could be used, but it was corrupted and needed repairs at a Buru forge beneath the Shadow Isles or something. Sure. But that closure that Ahri has been looking for is at the Buru Forge, and she learns through the channeling of memories within their twin sunstones that her people were this nomadic tribe of Vastaya that specialized in studying magic relating to memories. Their nomadic lifestyle brought them to the Blessed Isles, where they became allies with the city of Helia and began to study the ethereal hallowed mist that once protected the Isles. However, the Vistani became victims of the terrible ruination of Helia and ultimately created the Shadow Isles. To stop Viego from destroying Runeterra, she cleanses the memories of her ancestors in the Sunstones so that they could be used to store his memories and weaken him. And in the process of doing so, she was confronted by the memory of her lover, who forgave her and told her that she needed to fight for the future and urged her to live to create new memories instead of dwelling on old ones. So, closure. The crew returns to Bilge Water to fight the big bad evil guy, where Ahri uses her magic to weaken Viego, forcing him to remember all of the twisted parts of his love for Isolde. And as if that weren't enough, Viego, now beaten, gets hit by Ahri, who uses more of his memories against him, forcing him to relive his death when an angered wraith of Isolde killed him at the Blasted Isles, which is just a cold-blooded fox move. And while distracted, misfortune traps him in an amulet, as one does. And so Ahri and the others celebrate their victory at Baron's Rest Tavern, where they discuss what's next. This is where Ahri states that she plans on returning to the Shadow Isles, wishing that she could see what else she can learn from her ancestors, and dedicates herself to living in their footsteps, bringing life and new memories into the world, which somehow doesn't really translate over to League of Legends because she's still coming for your essence on the battlefield. Whew. Did you get all that? You good? You tracking? Do you need some sunstones of your own to retain all of the libraries of information of Ahri lore here? Don't worry, we're moving on to the cards next. So in League of Legends, she's got Charm, she sends in the Foxfire and the Orb of Deception into combat to deal magic damage, she's got Spirit Rushes to dash in and fire off Essence Bolts. In Legends of Runeterra, she's more recall-based, repositioning, the swap and recall attack pattern that she's got there, and Ahri's Charm spell that makes enemies vulnerable. So what is she going to do in Riftbound? We start with her legend, Ahri, Nine-Tailed Fox. This is the Calm and Mind domains, and when an enemy unit attacks a battlefield you control, give it -1 might this turn to a minimum of 1. So this ability is always on, there's no cost, there's no exhaust to do this thing, but it's entirely reactive, right? Like, it only matters when opponents attack her battlefield. So this means she's more of a defensive, hold-based strategy legend. So the might reduction angle is an interesting direction to take, given that so many of her League of Legends abilities deal with magic-based damage or manipulating opponents' movements. And so I reckon the might reduction is something to do with, like, I guess, thematically stealing their essence, so to speak, even though there's no game mechanic other than healing herself with essence theft, which I'd imagine is really hard to do in a game that races to 8 points. So in a way, this just kind of feels a little humdrum. Her signature spell that sees little to no play is the Foxfire. It's a hidden, so you can play it at a battlefield for 1 power, which you can react later by not having to pay. And as an action, you can play on your turn or during showdowns, kill any number of units at a battlefield with a total of 4 might or less for this 3 energy cost spell. So this is named after her W in League of Legends, and Foxfire releases those 3 flames that seek out nearby enemies, prioritizing weakened targets, and the Riftbound version is similar to that, killing a lot of smaller units at once, but probably more often than not, it's going after 1 single 4 might unit. The hidden keyword is an interesting bit, noting that it can be concealed, which is not really pairing with any of Ahri's other abilities in Legends of Runeterra or League of Legends, and so it's an interesting direction to take with the signature, but it's also very defiable. You can counterspell this pretty easily, and so you don't really see it as much, and it's also one of the weaker signature spells, especially when you see what happens in set 3 with how powerful those signature spells are. I'm also surprised they didn't take the initial idea to do something like they did with Unleashed version of Master Yi's signature spell Alpha Strike, or Crescent Strike for that matter, that can deal damage to multiple units. It's interesting that this feels pretty lackluster at the end of the day. Her champion unit out of Calm is Ahri Alluring, and this is a 5 energy, 1 Calm power costed unit with a might of 4, and the static, when I hold, you score 1 point. This is one of the cards that defined her hold focus strategy in the early metas of set 1, and so mechanically it's very simple. Thematically, it is something. I'll save my thoughts on holding and Riftbound later, but focusing on the unit itself, the meta is pretty much determined that it's easier to conquer than to hold. And so having a unit in theory that helps accelerate that hold to score points, to swing the pendulum into the reactive player's favor certainly helps. It's just that holding is very difficult in Riftbound, and so leaving a unit on their own is a big ask. So this is going to require a lot of setup just to protect her, and especially when board presence is a thing, Ahri Alluring is just a little bit expensive too to be put in the champion zone with the 5 energy, 1 power cost. So I mean, it still made the best of Ahri decks, which I guess is something, so there's still hope. The epic champion unit out of Mind, Ahri Inquisitive, is a 3 energy, 1 mind power costed unit with 3 might, and it reads, when I attack or defend, give an enemy unit here -2 might this turn to a minimum of 1. So this is similar to and more of that might reduction language from her legend ability, but this one's a little bit more active in combat on both attack and defense, which I think makes it a little bit more effective. And this one definitely sees the most play. It's pretty clear why. Not only is it more cost effective, but it's more proactive. So you can see it's useful on both offense and defense. And so while it's paired with Ahri's legend ability, it makes it a little bit more impactful. Plus all of the might reduction that Mind has access to, it makes it a pretty potent unit. Now you might be asking, what about Charm, Patrick? What about Charm? Well, it has its own card in Calm, and it's used by basically every Calm domain legend ever in the game. And in League of Legends, charmed enemies walk helplessly towards her, and she's slowing them down, making them vulnerable, which is kind of an interesting mechanism that can be utilized in Legends of Runeterra as well. But in Riftbound, the attackers get moved either onto or away from battlefields. So you have a lot more control over how the course of that battle, that showdown, is going to take place. So Ahri runs the Calm and Mind, the green and blue domains, the archetypal hold pairing apparently, and she was clearly designed as the hold legend of Origins. She's got the defensive legend ability, the champion unit that scores on hold, might reduction throughout with the other unit. The biggest difficulty for a game like Riftbound is translating what the hold mechanic looks like, porting that over from Legends of Runeterra or League of Legends, and that's something that's really unique to this game, so who would fall on that sword? And well, in this case, it seems like the easiest way to do that is utilizing one of the faces of the franchise as the face of the mechanism. More proactive Ahri builds are starting to emerge, and we're seeing it even as recent as the Vegas RQ, and so even Vex lists are starting to explore similar territory, so we're seeing this hold shell being reimagined to something more mid-range. Unfortunately, so far, it's been a little bit of a rough go for our nine-tailed fox friend here. She went 355th in Utrecht and I think 177 in Hartford, so a little bit of an improvement, but hold focus strategies in general just have been tough. And so as you can sort of see with Vex 2, who probably is getting a little bit of boost because she gets the chaos domain, we're still seeing that hold strategy is not as effective. There are just better builds that are coming out, like the mid-range Yi that we're seeing, who gets the might buffs, and I think that gets the benefit of orange. With the metal card prizing sunsetting for Origins and Proving Ground Legends, I'll be curious to see what this means for their appearances in RQs moving forward. I mean, she was still kind of showing up in third-party tournaments, usually in the like 2% range, so a little bit there, but it's likely due to overwhelming popularity, we'll still see her. I mean, until she rotates out in a couple years when Riot inevitably will create a new version of Ahri, we're going to probably continue to see her show up. However, lore-wise, Ahri is one of the strongest developed characters in the game, and it's unsurprising given her face of the franchise status. What started as a very mundane, sexy, foxy lady with a mysterious past, even to her, ooh, and she's taking your essence, is now turned into something that's actually compelling. I mean, having a magical fox that consumes a dying mage's essence to become human, it's a little out there. It took Riot a bit to get there, but eventually shedding this whole energy vampire thing and giving her some actual depth has been, it's been quite refreshing to see, to be honest with you. While the remorseful monster idea was the start of this pivot, I'm glad to see that they've kind of gone into a different direction, more along the lines of her embracing this monster and kind of focusing on the origins that she has. And so it'll be fun to see if Riot starts to explore more with this Vistani history, giving more background to the Blessed Isles and diving into more of the Vestaya, which is clearly a fan favorite, so we would learn more about the First Lands. So for Ahri mains, which version of her lore did you come up on? And do you feel that Riftbound has really captured the essence of her? Let me know in the comments below. New episodes drop weekly, so subscribe if this sounds like your sort of thing, and don't forget to hype if you're watching on mobile. But until next time, thanks for watching.